Hey, Gary, thanks for being here today. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So, we can go in a lot of different directions with this conversation, but let's talk about the relationship between in-house counsel and outside counsel. Um, and I know some of what you think, because we've talked about this before, and we've had you here before as well. What do you think? Like, if you had to put your finger on one or two or even three things that create a real healthy relationship that you want to see in the relationship, what are those characteristics, I guess, for lack of a better way to say it?
Communication. I could send instructions to my outside counsel. He looks at it and or she, can call me back and say, I think there's a better approach. I think it's great, but there has to be the communication. And there's two big things I see. One counsel I use now is like that. I could send them information and they'll be back with me, and there's been, a couple times they're very political. They'll say, I think there's a better approach to it. And there's other times where they say, okay, I think this is great, but I think we need to fill this gap, or we're just going to go ahead with it. Mm-hmm. And I've seen a lot of outside counsels that would have taken whatever I sent and just replied with it. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I've seen a lot of outside counsels that actually do the replies and you send it to them. There's two big types of firms. Ones that churn and ones that don't. They'll do a reply, but they'll do small replies. Mm-hmm. Just enough to reply and keep it going. And yes, we're giving you these great prices. We're only charging you X per reply, but their replies are 2 or 3 times another firm who's charging you a little more, but really tries to advance it.
Yeah. And this summer I taught a class again, which we've taught for many years now, but just retaught it and re-recorded it, about how do you actually prosecute? How do you, draft claims? How do you file applications? How do you write applications? What are the rules? What are the strategies? All that sort of thing. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at file histories to find things that are approachable, that you can teach from. And you do see a lot of office actions where none of the claims are amended. There's no new claims. I mean, it's not like you have to amend the claims. I get that. But particularly like if you're dealing with a 101 issue, and you're dealing with a patent that was written a few years ago, and now you get it rejected, just based on the case law and the way examiners are going, it's gotten easier at the office, I think, but not easier if what you're going to do is you're just going to stamp your feet and say, damn it, these claims were good, you don't get it. I mean, that's always seems like it's guaranteed to lead to just, no, I agree with myself. And now you're looking at a final with literally no useful concrete information from the examiner about what might work. Mm-hmm. And it frustrates me just reading it. I mean, I can imagine that for you as the client, that's got to be very frustrating when you see stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, examiner interviews are huge. Talking to the examiner, because I would say the majority of examiners, when you get them on the phone, a lot of times they are willing to help. Mm-hmm. There's always those ones that will never help, and I had one tell me she would allow a certain patent or family of patents, in this case, over her dead body. And
oh my God!
In those words.
So let's stop there for a second, because my philosophy has always been, I've been trying to tell people, if an examiner says something like that to you, you've got to put that on the record somehow. Like in the interview center, what is your philosophy there? And I ask sincerely because I think a lot of times people say, oh, well, I can't upset the relationship. And to me, if an examiner says that, or one that we've heard over the years is, I haven't allowed a patent since Alice and I'm not about to start. Well, if they say something like that, I don't think you need to be mean and nasty, but I think in the interview summary, you could say, talked about claims 1 through 20, no agreement was reached. The examiner said that she would not issue this over her dead body or something like that. I mean, what is your philosophy on that?
I put it a lot more politically, more or less in the examiner saw no way to allow this patent and I put in the comment, or any other one in this family. Mm-hmm. I have heard where people have put things in the record like that, mm-hmm. and it has come back to bite them from other examiners.
It's certainly an aggressive move. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And where I have talked about doing it, like, for example, is in some of the art units where they're literally low single-digit allowance rate. Because I don't think at that point you have any relationship to really, if you're to really worry about. I know you catch a lot more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. But it's got to be so frustrating to hear that, because there's no useful way really to switch examiners. What do you do in that situation then? Do you just get to appeal as quickly as possible?
Read through the file wrapper, make sure the case is ready for appeal. Mm-hmm. Try to see if there's any holes and try to patch those holes before you go to appeal, and then appeal it.
Yeah. Have you had any situations where you see that if you do win on appeal, then it goes back down and then they reopen and they do a new search? Have you experienced that kind of situation?
She actually reopened examination a few times in that family when it was in appeal.
Wow.
And then when we finally got to the end of the appeal and the board agreed, yes, it should grant, she waited till the last day.
Wow. Yeah, and that's unusual. I don't think most examiners operate like that, but it can be very frustrating when you find yourself in that place, particularly because I suspect that this is probably a place where you find yourself in terms of art unit with some frequency, right?
Mm-hmm. And actually, it's been 12 years because I looked up when the other patent issued. One of my cases was just assigned to her again. So that's not. I don't know what the answers are to any of those questions, but you can only try and work to the extent that it's available. But I do think that now with a lot of the statistics programs that are out there, you can see real granular information about examiners and see that, are you wasting your money with this RCE? And maybe not with the first one or the second one, but if you don't get something by the second one, a lot of times the numbers just drop off a cliff, and the examiner just historically does not allow anything after a second RCE. And if it matters, you got to appeal that. So how do you use any of those statistics to influence strategic decision making? Definitely.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite metric, like one that you look to see?
I've looked through so many of them over the last X number of years since they've been around. Patent Ninja used to be.
Yeah.
All that. And a lot of times I found the best one is how the examiner acts during an interview. Mm-hmm. Are they cooperative? Are they cooperative? Do they really want to help? Or when you propose something, do they just go, nah, that's not going to work? Or do they say, well, I think this may be a better path, or yeah, you would need that plus. And because I've had examiners where the matrix were awful, but then on the interview, when you start to have a relationship with them, because like you said, a lot of times you have a lot of cases with them, they do seem like yeah, I can kind of help you, or I can see a path down this way. And sometimes they say, you know what, I really have to think about that, and we reconvene.
Yeah. I'm surprised that more interviews aren't done. The statistics show over a long period of time that you just by doing an interview, you have a 10% higher chance of getting to an allowance. And that's across the art unit. I mean, like whatever the allowance rate is in whatever art unit you're in, it jumps. And for certain examiners, it probably jumps a lot more. In some, maybe not as much. But I just don't understand why everybody's not interviewing every case. And maybe it's not every case, because you get the first office action back. You can read between the lines. If they found anything that was allowable, good fact. If there's things that are just objected to because they're depending on things that they've rejected, that's a great fact, because those are easy to fix. But if you aren't seeing that kind of stuff in a first office action, I think you should interview every one of those cases and find out what's going on and whether there is something the examiner sees that you could do. What's your philosophy on interviews? You encourage them? You like them? It seems like you do, right?
Yes. Depends upon the examiner. I know one examiner I've had that I would never do an interview with because everything is a no. And then, when you try to put it in writing, well, they give a little different interpretation.
Yeah.
And I've, in that case, you know what? I don't want to have the interview. I want everything on the record.
Right.
I think interviews are a very strong tool.
Yeah. Does it surprise you that they're not used more?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually was just talking to an attorney, and I had him sit in on the class I just mentioned. And one of the things that he told the students is, even if the client is not willing to have you pay you to do the interview, in some cases it'll make a lot of sense just for you to pick up the phone and see, because over 5 or 10 minutes you may be able to, and what's 5 or 10 minute investment, if it breaks the logjam. So just because the client is, as long as they don't say don't do it, right? And even if they're not willing to pay for it, it can. And I'm not a fan of telling attorneys to do stuff that they're not getting paid for, but picking up the phone and saying, hey, I think we're talking past each other here. When I say X, you seem to be thinking Y, and can we try and get on the same page? I think that's just a no-brainer.
And I've had a lot of those where the interpretation of the language is just different between me and the examiner.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also the other thing too about examiners, sometimes they're engineers and scientists like we are. They don't necessarily write particularly well. We don't write particularly well. It's not like a criticism. It's just, we're none of us are going to win Pulitzer Prizes or write the great American novel. So I find it, when I'm reading office actions, very much more useful to not focus on the particularly this is with objections and maybe 112 rejections. Not focus on, because the examiner's confused about something. And sometimes I find they have some difficulty articulating exactly why they're confused. But then if they follow it up and say, with a suggestion that, if what you're trying to do is this, then maybe say this, or maybe do that. That's something that makes it so much easier to work with. So I think sometimes, and particularly earlier on in my career, I would get so frustrated at how could the examiner not, it's plain, it's simple, but then, I've spent however many hours more than they have trying to understand the technology so I could explain it. And I think that as I've gotten older and matured, I've seen a lot of talking past one another that could be easily rectified by just picking up the phone. So let me ask you this, just shifting gears slightly. We just did a webinar recently on on essentially rainmaking. How do you get clients? How do you what do clients want? That sort of thing. And what do you want as a client? Like, what do you want to see from your attorneys? You already mentioned communication, but are there any other things? And then maybe also what I'm thinking about, like, what would you consider "quote unquote" table stakes? Like this is, if I expect everybody to be able to do that. That's not a distinguishing feature, attorney, because if you can't do that, then we're never going to be interested. So what is the table stakes to even be in the game, and then what separates or differentiates in your mind?
One of the big ones is value for dollar. What are they giving you the value for the dollar that you're paying them? Because a lot of times the advice you get, whether it's not 20-something years ago, I was in-house. I met somebody at a seminar, and he was building his clientele. It was earlier in his career, and he said, "You know what? If you have a case you're having trouble with, let me look at it. No charge. I'll make some suggestions. If you like us, give us a chance after that." And
that seems like a pretty good deal, right? I mean,
he was great. And his advice to me was, "You've done everything I would have done. Now we need to think outside the box, and here's some ideas." Mm-hmm. And you know what? I'm still using him in another company, in multiple companies, and I've referred them to people that I know that are in other companies.
Mm-hmm. So it's about the value add.
It's about the value add, and it's kind of the trust that you build, that you're going to get the product that you want out of it.
Mm-hmm. Really as a team, right? I mean, yeah. So how much do you want your outside counsel to really understand your whether it's your business model or your patent philosophy, or understand the product line, or that sort of thing, or and I think I know the answer, so I'm just kind of just throwing it out there. Maybe this is a softball, then we can just kick it around. But and how much of it is it just, no, I asked you to do X, I really just need you to do X, or does it depend?
I think it's very dependent. It depends upon the patent application you're working with, mm-hmm. and what your goal is. I've had some really hard ones I've sent to outside counsel, and they've come back to me and they're like, "Okay, what do you need to protect, bare minimum, and let's start from there." And sometimes it's kind of it resonates with me because that's where I start when I have something like that. Okay, I need to protect this. Okay, we can protect this, and then we can add, if we argue this way, we can get this. Mm-hmm. As opposed to thinking, how do I argue each of these things? Because in the end, you may not be able to protect the nugget you need.
Yeah, so it's about the strategy to make sure you're getting what you need protected.
Right. And it's having communication. What do they need to know? Sometimes I've had patent portfolios that they need to know all about the whole product portfolio and what we're trying to build in the future, over the next 10 years, to really be able to give that value add when they're doing it. On the other side, I've seen law firms that send back suggestions, don't understand it, and it's not going to protect what you need. And I think that's one of the things, as an in-house counsel, I have to be an expert on my products, what the strategy is going forward, and be able to communicate that, and especially if I'm reviewing an office action response and say, you know what, this isn't working, here's why. But in a lot of years of due diligence, I know a lot of companies that they send the office action to their outside counsel and say, okay, reply to this. And they really don't have good input. They're not being the gatekeepers in-house.
Yeah,
But the other thing is, I think a lot of the in-house counsel need more experience doing their own prep and pros and staying current on it to be able to feel comfortable advising like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I also think that there is, I don't know that I would say a lot, but there's at least some talking past each other with inside counsel and outside counsel, not just with examiners. In that, I hear over and over and over again from people like you, in-house, and they'll talk about, well, yeah, I don't care about that claim. I sure, getting that claim is great if you can, but the one that I really need is this one over here. So that claim is really not helpful for me. So the fact that the examiner is offering this, and you need to amend like half the claim, that doesn't help me. And I think a lot of times outside counsel still, not as much as it used to be, but still, I think, get too focused on, well, what can I get? And there's nothing wrong with a narrow claim if that narrow claim covers the product very, very closely. Because now, in today's world, with how easy it is to ship stuff from China and elsewhere, you really have to keep an eye on knockoffs. I mean, probably everybody, if you have a product that can be touched and that is sellable on Amazon, for example, or other platforms, you have to have the claim that covers exactly what the product is. But so not all narrow claims are created equally, I guess is what I'm going for. There needs to be some strategy thinking in that. And I wonder how much of that really goes on. And I don't know why more doesn't go on. And I think some can be laid on the blame of the in-house counsel who aren't keeping the outside counsel as informed, and some can be maybe the outside counsel aren't as curious or interested as they could be. They see themselves almost like I'll just say it, like a claim processor. Mm-hmm. Like I can get this. I can't. The examiner won't let me have that. Well, no, it's your job to try and convince the examiner to get that because that's what I need. And there is this ships passing in the night.
And I think with outside counsel, sometimes they have to know who their in-house counsel is. Because when they're talking, let's say, to a European patent attorney, the European patent attorney may not be as savvy with litigation, with things that are going to come if you have to ever assert the patent later. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to give the advice, you know what? If this is a high chance of litigation, I say we take this narrow claim and we file a continuation. The prior art is right here, but with 2 continuations, we can cover most of this, and you'll be in a great place if you have to assert it. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to churn office actions, because I know in-house counsel that have done, no, we need this. I want it in one. And I will tell you, they've probably paid more in that prosecution than they would have for the whole life of 3 patents. But
so how does that happen? I mean, how does is it just the outside counsel not listening? Is it them not thinking creatively? Is it that they're doing this in a vacuum? And by that what I mean is they're focusing on just the legal work and the legal issues and not the business proposition?
You know what? I've seen all of that. And in some places, it's the in-house counsel. Mm-hmm. What the in-house counsel... Outside counsel does what in-house counsel wants and what they're instructed to do. If you don't... Sometimes I have to say, I want you to do this, but I'll admit to my outside counsel, I know it's counterintuitive, but this is what we need to do from an in-house perspective, because I may be modulating internal politics because I know we need 2 other continuations, but nobody wants to pay for it now. So you got to do this. And then when we're when we're in the black hole, we can split off, get the allowance here, and file those other continuations.
Yeah.
Or chunk. File one, and then a little while later file the other, But there's a lot of times in-house counsel is dealing with internal politics and budgets. You know what? I can't pay for this now, and I know we have to. So do this, and then we'll kick it into next year's budget. And we'll do it in January and February when we have the full budget, and we'll move on.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And communication, again, it comes back to communication, so you understand what's going on. So now, as you were just talking about this, and because this is the way that I think patent prosecution is intended to operate, right? You get what you can in this, and then if it's an important asset or potentially important asset, you file a continuation and you keep trying to expand. And I realize you don't want to just carve it up so small that each asset is not particularly useful or interesting, and you have to have in mind what you're getting. But just history shows us that examiners become more willing to give rights after they've made the decision to give you something. Mm-hmm. So you got to break through to the other side. To quote the Doors, break on through to the other side, right? But at the same time, what I see going on in the legal landscape right now that scares the hell out of me is this idea of prosecution laches. And it came up, I don't know when it first came. I think it first really reared its head in the Gil Hyatt cases, where the Federal Circuit actually said if it's pending longer than 6 years, it's presumed to be laches. And then that has now been picked up by some district courts more recently, including in the Sonos versus Google case. And when I tell people this, when at events here, I'll ask, how many of you are aware? In-house, outside people, nobody really is aware of this. And then I see a shock go over their face, and I know what they're doing. They're thinking, how many of my cases right now are older than 6 years? And most people have a lot of cases that are older than 6 years. So as the client, as the owner, does this idea of prosecution laches scare the hell out of you? Are you yet changing your philosophy at all? Or do you think that cooler heads are going to prevail at some point in time? Do you think that prosecution laches is about the actor and not the time length? What are your thoughts?
I think it's going to depend more on the actor. I think depending how things go in the next year or two at the patent office and the courts and some philosophies that are going on, if they become more pro-corporate and less pro-kill the patent, I think we can really strengthen the patent system. And, okay, I've inherited cases and I've passed them on, and they're still in prosecution because we'll never get anything. And you know what? You got to keep it moving and keep it alive, because a competitor can, keep a competitor guessing.
Yeah. I've
also seen other cases where prosecution churning, there were these replies, and it keeps going, and nobody ever got to the big issues to solve the big issues. And I think there's a lot of it too, and I've seen some in due diligences and stuff that, it's like, well, why didn't you reply to that 4 years ago? Make that argument. We didn't think of it, or, who knows? As far as laches, I think outside counsel sometimes needs to advise internal clients about the risk of that, because I don't think it's on the forefront. And sometimes being told by outside counsel that this is a risk can help move things along. Because there's times that I've seen that the internal people think the outside counsel are a lot smarter than the in-house counsel, and they know more. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong.
So, but even if they are, let's just assume, for sake of argument, the outside counsel are smarter. The one thing that they uniformly lack, even those who really, really try, is they're not living the business reality day in and day out. Usually your outside counsel have more than one client, and that's what happens. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not intended to cast aspersions on anyone. It just is. That's why the relationship is so important. Is have the outside counsel who presumably is going to have a lot more broad-based experience working with the office, and then have the product, service specific business interest, philosophy, goals in the in-house counsel, and that's where you really get a team. I think that this all works best as a real team, not as on a transaction by transaction basis. And I don't understand why more companies don't get it, and I don't understand why more law firms don't get it. Because if an independent inventor came to you, and I know this because they do it, they used to do it to me. I don't represent folks at the moment, but you get sometimes somebody who wants attorney A to do the search, and they don't want the opinion to be influenced by the fact that they may get the application work. So then they'll take that search to go to attorney B, and they don't want that attorney who wrote the application and filed it to be the one who prosecuted. And this is just crazy to me. It's like you are taking like all of these possible efficiencies from the time that I went through the search, I gave you the opinion, I know the prior art, I know what your invention is. I should be the one to draft the application. Otherwise, you got to start over. And I've had people come to me and say, well, I want you to use this search. And I'm like, well, that's fine, but I got to come up to speed on what, I can't just hit the ground running. And sometimes you won't even want to rely on the searches that they got. So when you put it in that context, I think almost every patent professional gets that, and it's like, oh, yeah, I don't want to work with that kind of attorney. Well, sometimes I see the relationship between corporation and in outside counsel sort of the same way. Without the communication, without the institutional knowledge, without a real teamwork, then it really just becomes not as bad as the transactional nature that I just described, but certainly not optimal.
In a lot of times, I've known in-house counsel that they don't want to talk to the outside counsel because they don't want to get billed for the half hour. Yeah. But the in-house counsel a lot of times needs to know what the invention is, what the product is, because at the end of the day, the patent application may show, the nose of the elephant, but really you're trying to patent the elephant.
Right.
And
I have another story about that too that just shocks. So when I was doing work for people, and Renee managed my calendar because everybody wants to get onto my calendar, which I would love to talk to everybody. I just unfortunately don't have that time. So I was on a business. This is a while ago. I was doing business travel, so obviously had to be really before pre-pandemic when I was on the road all the time. And I had over lunch, she had booked a telephone call for me, and then I look at what this guy wanted to talk about, and I'm like, oh my God, this is a perpetual motion machine. And I called her, and I was all angry, and I'm like, how could you, like, I'm in the middle of this business trip. I have a moment to take a deep breath at lunch. How could you put a perpetual motion machine on my calendar? And then she said, just talk to the guy. So I talked to the guy, and he tells me what his invention is. And then I tell him, it's like, you realize none of what you just told me is actually in your application. And he says, yeah, I've come to that conclusion. And so then we had to figure out, well, what can we do, if anything, to help them. But that is another example of ships passing in the night. And, I don't know what the solution for that. And one of the, I guess, solutions is, and I wanted to, so let's just throw it out here now. What is your philosophy on having outside counsel come on campus, for example, wherever your campus may be, where your engineers and scientists are working, to see what they're doing, to maybe do a brainstorming session over a day or two? In my experience, that always leads to more disclosures, it leads to more applications, and I think better applications. What is your philosophy there?
I've seen it be good and bad.
Okay, so let's talk about the good first. Where do you think it works, and where do you like it?
When I've seen, we've got all this stuff going on, and we have the seeds of stuff there, and it's not coming out. Okay, getting somebody in there outside of, a lot of times I've done the brainstormings, I've tried to do it, and it works great. Sometimes you just need to get somebody else in. It may not be fully in my purview, my experience, and they can talk to them. Sometimes outside counsel are not relatable to these people, and the people are turned off, and they kind of go the other way.
Okay, so that's the bad, and I guess that's a significant risk potentially.
And I've seen times where outside counsel comes in, to the brainstorming and trying to get things, and all of a sudden there's all these invention disclosures that aren't worth the money. They're not worth the ink that was on the paper. And people think that they have this great invention and they want to file applications, and there needs to be kind of a level setting too. So it depends upon the situation, and I think a lot of times it depends upon how active the in-house counsel is. I've seen in companies where the company wouldn't have any patents if they relied on the in-house counsel to harvest it. You need the outside counsel to come in. But on the other hand, I've also seen times where outside counsel has to come in because the company doesn't do a broad range of stuff. They do a small amount of things, and they're good at it. Outside counsel needs to understand what they're doing in the broader sense, just maybe not to harvest inventions, but to be able to function with them to the best of the company's needs.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other things that's come up over the past particularly few years is we've tried to, I wouldn't say shift our focus, but we've started doing a lot more stuff that is relevant to in-house folks. As you know, you've been on some of our panels. And one of the things that does come up over and over and over again is people will say, particularly when they join a new company, but not exclusively, they just start showing up at meetings, whether they were invited or not. And so I've had multiple people say almost the same thing. You start going to these weekly engineering meetings or whatever, once a month, whatever, and you as the patent attorney start showing up, and they're like, well, what are you doing here? You weren't invited. Correct. I wasn't invited. Okay, well, why are you here? Well, because I'm the patent attorney. It's like, right, but we're going to be talking about technology. And then they have to take a step back. So go, hold on, what do you think pays for all this stuff that you guys do? And you got to kind of break through. And I almost feel like I liken it to the TV commercial where the guy keeps getting fired, but he's eating the crunchy cereal, so he can't hear that the boss is firing him. So he just keeps showing up over and over again. And I do think that showing up is more than half of life. Sometimes it's 80 or 90%. And I think that seems like a very useful way for in-house counsel to be using at least some of their time. What is your philosophy on that?
I think relationships are the key. A lot of times, I've taken care of a lot of R&D facilities, being their IP support. And a lot of times, you go around, you get the tour, you find out what people do, you try to show up to some meetings, and then maybe a couple of them say, hey, how about we meet for lunch, or we meet for a coffee, and you chat about what they're doing, and, hey, where did that come from? What can we, and you build a relationship. They're more likely to come to you later, and you might find stuff that is, well, in one case I found stuff that the direction they were going down was going to infringe somebody.
Yeah.
And it was better for them to know it early.
Right.
But in a bunch of other cases, it's like, we can protect that. And they're like, we can.
And often they don't know. And that is, and we've done some writing on this, and we've done, at least comes up occasionally in our panels when we talk about this, is what's known as the imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the people who are most adamant, oh, this is the world's greatest invention, really don't have much. But the people oftentimes who think, if I came up with it, it probably is not an invention, not really. Those folks often have some really good, interesting stuff, but they just don't feel like it's worthwhile. I mean, that's so critical to get them to understand.
Yeah.
And I think, so let me phrase it this way, and I know we've been going a while, and I really appreciate it. I think this would be a great conversation, but I think if I were trying to build out an in-house legal team, and I'd like to get your input on this, I think one of the key things that you can do, at least on the patent side of that legal team, is to have people who are really curious, really, technologists, really interested. Because if you can, genuine, and I'm not saying fake it, this is not a fake it till you make it type thing, but if you have people that are really genuinely interested, particularly in what you're doing, what your engineers and scientists are working on, I think that's so critical, because often when you go home, I joke around, I'm sure you have this at home, we're important people in our day job. When we go home and we're still just dad, oh, dad doesn't know anything, right? Often engineers and scientists are the same thing. They can't really go home and talk about what they're working on. And if you are genuinely excited about what they're working on, that's a great relationship builder. So what is your philosophy on all this, the interpersonal between the in-house team and your researchers, scientists, engineers?
I think a lot of times it's the follow-up. It's, we had a conversation, and then a month later I'm going to be back there. And it's like, hey, I was thinking about what you were talking about. Here's some patents in that area, I don't know if you're aware of. And a lot of times we'll talk through them, or find out they don't know how to read a patent. And they really don't know what it is. And which, funny enough, I've worked with a lot of high executives that don't know the difference between patents, trademarks, and copyrights. They think it's all the same, and once you start to explain that, it gets interesting. But a lot of the engineers, you start to build their interest. And it's like, well, he was able to get a patent on that, so why can't I get a patent on this? Exactly. That was what I was trying to get at. And they're, you tell them they can have it, and the person of ordinary skill in the art, they think the person of ordinary skill in the art is something up here.
Right.
Because they're at the top of their game.
Do you find that even more so with respect to PhDs? The more educated you are, the less that they think that what they're working on is patentable, because you spend so much time learning more and more about less and less until, as the saying goes, you know everything about nothing. And I find that affects PhDs more so than anybody else.
I find more experienced people, because
Really?
they've seen so much.
Yeah.
So they're using they're using the reference of their experience to judge their invention when actually, your experience is so vast that we really need to tie things down.
Well, I agree, and I think it should be obvious to you as the inventor because you're the one that invented it. And if it's not obvious to you, then what hope do you have of explaining it to me? So I can explain it to an examiner so that it can go on writing so that a district court judge or a prospective licensee or prospective buyer might later on be able to understand it.
And that's the other thing. The inventors, I find, aren't used a lot. When I get an office action and I'm looking at some of the prior art, sometimes sitting down with the inventors, they look at it and go, this isn't even close, and here's why.
Yeah, and every company seems to have a different philosophy about using inventor time like that. But I'm with you because oftentimes, I would do a search, and I found what they told me, and I'm thinking I'm about to deliver very bad news, and I do hey, take a quick look at this, and then let's get on the phone and talk about it. Because you don't want to put bad news in writing unless they force you to, right? For a variety of reasons, maybe they do want it in writing, but usually they don't, and you shouldn't. And they contact you, and they're all excited. It's like, great, you didn't find my invention. It's like, okay, hold on, sporty, let's dial this back because I think I did. And they're like, no, these are totally different. Okay, why? And it's that moment usually, particularly with the more inexperienced inventors, that they are for the first time going to explain to you the golden nugget that makes it an invention that they've never mentioned before. And oftentimes, okay, well, now I didn't search for that, so I got to go take another look. But once you get that nugget, that's the gold, and you can build off of it. So I think it is a mistake to so jealously guard in inventor time. You can't waste it. But I think you have to make your inventors available to, whether it's inside counsel, outside counsel, or occasionally maybe both, with the understanding that these have to be very targeted conversations and not a lot of time wasted. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. And one of the things I'll sometimes do, if I thought it was close, I will sometimes put a little bit in the background section about it, about what is so different. Because later on, I think the examiner may have a slightly different interpretation of that.
Well, certainly if there's any 101 concerns at all, that's the ENFISH exception, for lack of a better way of describing it, is how people are driving the truck through the judicial exceptions, right? Is because this is better, stronger, faster, stores more, less energy, whatever it is. But we got away from writing applications like that after KSR. And it doesn't need to be, like a thesis as to why these things are different, step-by-step comparison. But there needs to be a sentence or two. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. So I'm going to give you the floor here to just wrap up. What are your final thoughts on what we've talked about? Or is there something that you wish we had spent some time and we didn't get to?
Yeah. One of the things that had come to mind is sometimes you may not be able to protect your product, but you can protect around it. And I had a family of patents. My product was totally not patentable, but there was enough of there was enough insulation around our product that until the patents expired, nothing was on the shelf next to it.
And that's your goal.
And that's the goal, because nobody ever figured out that you can make our exact product.
Because you patented the hell all
around it.
And you've talked about that strategy before, and I wish. Well, maybe we should just kick that around a lot. Is that something is it one of these one-off? It happens when it happens, and you just have to be, or can you engineer that?
Well, it's sometimes realizing early on, and at the time I was working on it, It was an older case. It was inherited. And I looked at it and said, we're not getting this product. And the business wanted to abandon it. And I said, we can protect around it. We can give ourselves, my thinking at the time was, we can give ourselves room to modify our own product, and keep the competitors out of that. I never would have thought that competitors would never notice the product wasn't patented.
Yeah. And maybe to give them more due is, a lot of times with certain products, you don't want to do a one-off. If you can't expand the product line, then it's not as attractive, because in business, the easiest way to make money is to sell to people who are already your customers, because they already like you, they already do business with you, they already have approval to spend money with you. And so if you can only offer the one thing, and you can't offer all the peripheral stuff or where version 2, 3, 4 might want to go, that would probably be a real detriment to a forward-thinking company.
Yeah. And even a traditional company, I mean, patents are 20 years. You have 20 years to work with this. You also don't want to create prior art to your next generation by not taking advantage of it now.
Yeah.
And I know of one instance where the business unit had plans 3 years to move into a certain country. We had been patenting up to that point in that country. The global business decided budgets were being cut. If you don't have a business in that country, kill the patents. 3 years later, when they tried to launch, they had competitors everywhere and a failed launch, which would cost more. That failed launch probably cost a lot more than those patents that were sitting there.
Well, it's not only the failed launch; it's the tail, right? What could have been? What could this have led to? How much money have you left on the table? And this is why making these decisions not to pay maintenance fees, to let applications go abandoned, these can't be done simply by using a Ouija board or throwing darts against the wall, or as so often is just across the board, you need to cut 20%.
Yeah.
It's got to be strategic.
And are things still there? There's products that have been on the market since we were kids. 20 years of protection on something like that was well worth it.
Yeah. I wish we could keep going. I'll have to have you come back, because the one thought that comes to mind there too is really the critical nexus I think a lot of people miss between patents and trademarks. You get an opportunity to establish your brand over a period of almost a generation. And that's really, if you don't have a holistic view of IP, I think you're missing your opportunity. And I get when you are a hammer, the world looks like a nail. So if you are a patent attorney, you maybe aren't as interested in trademarks or copyrights or trade secrets. But there's a synergy between all of these things, and the goal is to provide protection to the product, to the client.
Well, and as an in-house counsel, I think it's the responsibility to touch all of those. We had a case a long time ago, previous company, we were being infringed, and we found out because a distributor was getting complaints about our products in the hospitals. And we found out those weren't our products. They were coming in. Patents, you can't stop them at the border. But if you stick a trademark on them, you could stop them at the border. So being able to advise on these different areas. And companies sometimes, we want to keep that a trade secret. Okay, understand. Here's what you need to do for it really to be a trade secret. The average person is leaving within 5 years. So they're going to be taking it with them. Giving a level set and saying, okay, There are things that should be kept trade secret. There are things that, you know what, we'll protect that with a design patent, but we might also want to trademark it, or we might want to do something. It's having a more holistic view to get the best bang for your buck. How can we protect this the best?
Yeah. Yeah. This has been a fascinating conversation, Gary. I really appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back and join us again.
Sure.
Thanks.